A blind person can be heard tapping along a tile floor with their white long cane. They tap along until they come to a door. They try the door handle, which they find locked. The person continues tapping along the floor to the next door. They try the handle and find it locked. They try it again. Yes, it's locked. The blind person continues along, tapping along the floor to the next door. The door opens, and the hallway is flooded with white light. Fade to white. Welcome to Blind Freedom, a channel where you can find some tools, tips, and techniques to cope with the challenges and barriers that blindness can present to obtaining freedom and independence in functioning. Hi, my name is Terry. I'm blind. This podcast is also partly about my experience with my blindness, where I've discovered a lot of things that work and a lot of things that don't. And I want to share all of the things that do work with you so that maybe that will help you out on your quest for independence and freedom. If you have any suggestions for me along the way, please let me know. Welcome if you're sighted as well, because if you want to learn more about what it's like to be blind or how to help someone who you know who is blind, this is a place where hopefully you'll learn something that would be helpful there. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hi, this is Terry. I'm your host, and I'm blind. Welcome to the second podcast of Blind Freedom. My first podcast was Independence Days. I hope you give that a listen. This episode is titled Getting Started. It picks up after you've learned to accept your blindness and you've kind of gotten rid of all of the vision fantasies that you have, that you'll be able to do things the way that you always used to when you were sighted. And then all of a sudden there's all sorts of things that maybe you like to do, maybe you need to do, maybe other people want you to do, but they're all sorts of things that you'll have to learn how to do. Now, I've been working at learning how to deal with my blindness so that I can break through to my freedom and my independence for about 2 years as of the airing of this episode. And looking back on those 2 years, I want to tell you from the advantage of learning about many things that work and many things that don't work, some of the things that I've tried to do over that time, and I've made a lot of progress, so I'm happy about that. I have a long way to go. I'm happy about that too. And the things that I found about getting started were, very first thing was how to use my computer. This is an issue that many of you may not face if you're not in employment or you don't use a computer. But these days there's a growing number of us that are employed, I am, and use a computer. I use it all the time. It's really required to be able to accomplish all of the functions and tasks of my job performance. And being able to do that without being able to see the screen of your computer, that takes a lot of work. At first, you have to understand that there are different commands to be able to get around a keyboard and a screen. And those commands are very difficult, but you do learn them as you go along. And those commands are associated with some wonderful software that really helps a lot, although they're not perfect, and some of the peculiarities of each one are quite odd, but they're called screen readers. What these wonderful little software things do is they will convert what's printed or visual on the screen that other people can see into a voice. It will read to you. Now, the first screen reader, and the most basic one, and the easiest one, and I use it all the time, is NVDA. Now, with NVDA, all you have to do is hover with your mouse above the area that you want to be read, and it will read it to you. This is very, very handy. It does still rely on kind of being able to see the screen and being able to use your mouse to be able to find a place on the screen, but with the voice guidance, it's kind of easy to do. If your vision progresses like mine did beyond the ability to be able to navigate the screen in any reliable way by using your vision, then you learn to rely more heavily on these screen readers. And it's like learning a different language, really. I suppose, and I've heard from others that are old DOS users of computers, that the keyboard functions sound familiar to them, and early gamers might find them familiar. But being able to navigate around a screen requires learning new keystrokes and combinations of keys. These are standard for every keyboard. They are issued by Microsoft, and you can look them up online, and there are thousands of them. As you begin to use the screen reader, you will begin to learn which ones you want to use, and you can search for those individually and try them out. It's kind of fun each time you figure one out so that you can accomplish some skill independently without relying on anyone else, so just certainly someone else with vision, to do it for you. I can remember for a long time I didn't know how to add a tab to my Chrome, which is an Internet Explorer. And boy, was I really happy when I learned the keystroke command for that. I can fly around the keys at this point, but even now I still don't know a lot of the commands, and really should invest some time in some school and supervised learning to make more advances. But back to getting started. There's another very more powerful screen reader. It's called JAWS. My version was supplied free by the Mass Commission for the Blind. And it uses all of the same commands as NVDA. However, it has a lot more capabilities. I still don't use JAWS as much as I should. I will be learning to do that more with supervised training as well. That certainly, learning how to use a screen reader on my computer opened up the world of being able to function as a literate computer user. Associated with that, and kind of the next step in the process, And how fast this process works depend on you and what you're interested in and how much time you have to invest on these things. The next one for me was mobility. And formally it's called Orientation and Mobility by the Mass Commission on the Blind. And I have a therapist for that. And I can remember the first day I met with my therapist. She asked me to describe my blindness, and she asked me if I used a cane. I said no, but I probably should. She agreed, and she presented me with my first long white cane. Well, now this is the marker of a blind person, if there ever was one. People recognize that. And when you reach out and take your first one, it's with a mix of emotions, let me tell you. I certainly was eager to get my cane. It's free, and boy, I really need to learn to walk with one so that I can get around, because I can't see anything to get around anyway. Otherwise, it's kind of dangerous. I gave up driving a long time ago, but walking I really don't want to give up. These long canes are really great, and they're fairly simple to use. You need a professional to help you pick out the right one for you, because they come in different lengths depending on your height, so that it reaches out in front of you far enough to help you as you're walking along. The training at first is very simple with rudimentary situations that you have to learn to practice for. Walking along a hallway, coming to a doorway. And the real next step is like going up and down stairs. Scary at first, but with the right technique, it's quite safe and very simple, and you can do it quickly. You do have to have two hands free, one for your cane and one for the handrail. So you will have to invest in a good backpack for anything else you're going to carry. And if you've got more than that, you're going to have to get some help. But going up and down stairs becomes totally easy and no longer a barrier, other than the effort required to climb the stairs. And there's really a sense of pride you get every time you do it. I do. And there's really kind of a exhilaration when other people see you do it. They're kind of amazed usually, because it's something to watch when a blind person does that. Now these long canes, also when you accept your first one, you have to accept the fact that you're going to be now identified as blind. I found that to be a good thing, because people are very helpful if they understand that you're blind, and there's not an easier way to tell them than to be holding a cane. I do find that people still do not understand what blind people are capable of in their mobility, and I do have to advise people who are trying to help me many times that I don't need as much help as they're trying to give me. And after a little bit of walking, they usually can recognize the level of independence that I am capable of, and I do ask for assistance when necessary. My mobility teacher taught me how to do that and how to teach others as well. Fairly simple. I do have to say that the white canes themselves, they're a piece of equipment. There's something for you to consider carefully once you learn to use one, about how they will best fit you. They fold up into sections that are small so that they can be tucked away. Very handy, especially when you get in and out of a car. And you don't need to have one, so put that room in your backpack for when you need to get it in and out. The long canes themselves, you're supposed to formally take them and hover about an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch above the surface in front of you as you go along. And it will detect, minor variations in the surface. Well, I am not that adept at using my cane, and I suppose I'm kind of lazy. I roll my cane, kind of. There's a roller tip, and it helps me a great deal because I can keep in contact with the ground in front of me. Here in New England, that ground is usually very uneven and unpredictable unless it's been freshly paved. And I will also say that when I'm using my cane, I tend to grip fairly firmly onto it, so that I learned quickly that when I come to a sudden stop with my cane, that's quite a jarring effect on my wrist. And I did invest in probably what I would say is the Cadillac of cane handles. It's kind of like a shock absorber. It's spring-loaded, so that when you jam to a stop with the cane, you have a little room with your wrist and to absorb that stop. I know I stumbled and almost fell over one time when I was walking fast and it stopped. So be careful. They have all sorts of different kinds of tips. They have very large round ball tips. I want to try those probably on gravel and off the road when I get into the woods. They have tips that hook on. They have tips that slide on. They have tips that can be tips of the cane that can be customized, so you really can make it your own. It is going to be something that's a tool that probably will be with you forever, and you'll want to make sure you always have it with you. Don't be embarrassed about using it. The next issue, which for me followed, was using the telephone. Well, now this is a task that is still ongoing for me. I had to make a selection early on, because I'm a heavy technology user, that I wanted to find the easiest way to do things. So I did pick Apple as my platform for products, devices, and software. Apple, fortunately, is very blind friendly. They have developed a lot of assistance and accessibility tools for us to use. They will set them up for you. They'll teach us how to use them. And they are incredibly very useful. So I do have an iPhone. And most people who have an iPhone do know that there's something on it called Siri. It's a voice activation or voice control feature. It's not made just for blind people, and anybody who has a HomePod, they have the same ability to talk to their iOS system through Siri, and Siri talks back to them. It really much is just a search engine, so with a voice. And it can help you do all sorts of things on your phone if you set it up to be controlled by Siri. That's very helpful, but then, of course, just like a computer, you can't really rely on your vision for doing anything, so there's a screen reader for phones. Thank goodness. The screen reader for Apple is called VoiceOver. Now, this is an amazingly great software development. It works on all devices that are Apple, whether it's your phone or your iPod or iPad or your Mac. VoiceOver changes the commands that you use on the phone, on the screen, so that a regular user really will not be able to use it. And it's important for you to learn how to disable it for when you need assistance so that you can get the help when you need it and then turn it back on. And voiceover, you have to learn the commands just like the commands for the screen, so that you can navigate. But once you do, it becomes quite easy and convenient. I think the next issue that I had to learn was transportation. And that, thanks in large part to the state of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind, there's a program with the MBTA called the RIDE. And once you establish your eligibility, which is basically your blindness, and your need for special transportation, that's just for blindness, and your equipment is generally just your cane. You are then eligible to sign up for discount rides through the T. Those rides could be on small buses, but by and large, they are provided by Uber and Lyft. And they're very inexpensive, so that we can get freedom and independence and get to places that we need to go. The downside of this is that you have to schedule your rides at least the day before, and you can't schedule your rides more than 10 days in advance. So you can't call for a ride on the spot. And you have to have some planning so that you know when your schedule will be requiring a ride and a wait for a ride. And there are multiple reminders that come either by telephone or text or email every time there is a ride, and every time you schedule a ride, and after you've had a ride. People are very considerate as drivers. And the Lyft or Uber drivers, they really don't know that they're having a blind client, even though they're all required to be trained in how to deal with a blind client. And they don't know that their fare is discounted to us so that there's no discrimination. I don't know what the arrangement is between the MBTA and the Uber, but I'm sure they get paid the same somehow. It's a great thing for blind people. And those are probably the things that I found for getting started that are the most important. They're the most difficult because they're very new, they're very overwhelming. Once you start, each time you learn something, you get an excited feeling of accomplishment. It helps with all the frustration, and it does keep your motivation up every time you learn how to do something new. I have to caution you a little bit because with technology, they change things all the time. So just when you learn something, it will change a little bit. If you expect that, it'll be okay, because then you'll just relearn a little bit. I mentioned that I was excited about a development of the use of GPS apps on my telephone for mobility. Boy, this ties things together pretty well, doesn't it? That's why it's been taking so long for me to figure out how to do this with the help of the Mass Commission for the Blind. It requires setting up an app on your telephone, a GPS app, and it requires learning how to use that app to make a route, and then it requires how to use your phone to follow that route, and it actually gives you advice as you're going along, and And then I'm working on how to write up the procedure for that so that it's simple once it's all figured out. And hopefully it will be free altogether for people so that it will help everyone gain access to areas that they may not have had access to before. I want to take walks in the parks in Weymouth, public parks that are well maintained, but they're off the grid, and you have to be able to combine all sorts of technologies with your willingness to take risks in order to get the independence and the freedom. I hope this was helpful to you. I am working at getting better at these podcasts. Any advice that you have, any requests about anything I've said, any advice about how to do something better than what I've said, and any acknowledgement about it works for you. All of that, any of that would be really helpful. Feel free to get in touch. Thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Terry. This is a sneak preview. I'm at Abigail Adams State Park working on my GPS project. We figured out a lot of kinks that are still having to be worked on, but I wanted to let you know, and I'm also practicing my video. See you soon. Thanks. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I hope that it's helped to motivate you, to challenge your barriers of your blindness, to get freedom and independence. I hope that it's inspirational in anyone who needs to move to this spot in recovery and dealing with their blindness. And people who are far ahead of me, I hope it reminds you of what it was like to be here. If you have any advice, please share it, just like I'm trying to share the advice that I've learned from my experience so far. I think these are things that are important to share because it's hard to know as you're going along what will work and what won't work. And when you find out what does work, that's a huge discovery. I hope that if you're sighted, that this has helped you to gain some insight into what blindness is like and what kinds of things that you might be able to do to help someone who has blindness. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you did, please subscribe so I can notify you of other podcasts. I also want to tell you about my website, which is coming soon. It's called blindfreedom.net, and you can review videos there, product recommendations, and even purchase some products that I think are really helpful that are hard to find. Thank you for listening, and thank you especially for production assistants Matt, Julia, and Paula.